Each of these gentlemen are from a mixed enterprise. So we've got Sam from Cranbrook. He has a heavy focus on growing as much feed as possible with the purpose of increasing stocking rate. You two, you've had your turn to talk. Thank you. We've got Xavier White from Wagen. He's interested in trials, new techniques, and he said updating to better gear. We've also got Benny Zadow, also known as Mark Zadow, just to confuse people, who farms between Broomhill and Kojonup. He focuses on pushing the envelope through higher stocking rates and making the most out of every hectare. And Ed is going to have a chat and see what these guys have done. They've all started by changing one single thing on their farm, which has led to them running a completely different system. So Ed's going to have a chat to them about the impacts that's had and how they got there.
Welcome, guys. Woo! Some legends here. So, yeah, I'm going to be talking about the domino effect because it's really, sheep businesses pretty simple to run, but they're actually quite complex. You change one thing and then you sort of really have to change something else to make it work, or you're changing a crutching or changing a shearing, or you change time of lambing or whatever it is, or you change a system and everything starts to change. So I just find it really interesting, and particularly about what we've talked about. I've been banging on about confinement feeding, and we talked about this morning about what people are doing, but, how do you bloody do it? And where do you start? And how do you get to your destination? So I thought it was really interesting to get these guys up who'd made some changes in the last 4 years and actually go through their systems and ask about how they got to where they are today. Now, our first presenter is Xavier White. He's a legend. He's officially a legend because he got up at 4 o'clock this morning and went bike riding. He did dry July, right? But wait, he has three kids, and he's got one of them was born this year and he did dry July. It's amazing. My kids are like 7, 9 and 10 and I can't do dry July. You started for a day anyway. It didn't really quite got there. There's a legendary person to start off with. Rightio, Xavier. So I'll just get to my notes. So Xavier, where do you farm, mate?
So we're halfway between Wagen and Dumbleygun.
Yep. And what's the rough size of your farm?
A couple of thousand hectares.
Yep. And how many sheep do you run?
Usually hang around a couple of thousand.
Yep.
Merino mating ewes and then the hoggets and stuff.
Yep. So, and what percentage crop and sheep are you at the moment? Or what's roughly where's it been?
75 to 80% crop, depending on what's going on, how I feel at the time. I like the idea of sheep.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I've been working with Xavier for 10, 11 years, I think. It must be. It's frightening. He's still got dark hair. Mine's gone very grey in the meantime. So let's take you back to 4 or 5 years ago. And can you tell me about the system you were running with your livestock then, or your whole system then?
Yeah, so I'm basically a cropping guy. Dad sort of was doing the sheep. We'd be sort of a clover or a medic pasture, very clean, like hit it with select. So we'd be we were May lambing.
Yep, lambing in May. And your pastures were flat like bowling greens of clover.
Yeah.
Immaculate.
Yeah, they were. Which made for a nice, clean cropping system and a pretty simple sheep system.
Yep.
But lower DSE, I think we were 4 or 5 DSE, somewhere around there. Low stress, I suppose. But we found ourselves fairly often lambing onto bare dirt.
Yeah, and some confinement feeding during lambing. I think there was
we had a few stuff ups with that sort of thing.
But
trying to, there was just nowhere for the sheep to stand. That was the problem because we were trying to grow pastures and trying to grow crops. So there was a problem there, I guess.
And you started to try and, so I guess we did a bit of benchmarking. We banged on about stocking rate a bit. Was that like a bit of you started to go, well, how do I increase my stocking rate? Is that where it sort of started?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we had quite good lambing percentages, but, sitting down with yourself and the other guys and realising that it's the per hectare stuff that matters.
Yeah.
That actually matters.
It's such a boring thing, and it's such a disappointment when you realise landing percentage isn't at the end of the world.
No. So, yeah, that was the old system, I guess.
So what was the first thing to start to change? So there was a motivation to make more money. Was that?
Yeah, and you pestering me. So there was... change. So we tried lifting our DSE like everyone says, and just had a few failures and it all came out of the silo basically.
Yep.
Didn't work.
Yep.
Yep.
So you started with stocking rate, and then did you go back down, or what did you do then? What was the next step? Was it a bit of, I think, crop? Did you start crop grazing, or?
We're doing a bit of that now, but so lifted the DSE, didn't work. Then we sort of pushed lambing back a month.
So you bit the bullet, you went hard.
Well, we pushed it back 1 month, lambed onto bare pasture, and now it was really cold, and there was a couple of I told you so's from Dad.
1st of June.
Yeah. Now we've still got no pasture, but it's just cold now. So we went another month. And so, we're kind of into the new system now. So
what's that? So what's that system look like?
So we basically...
We've got some photos behind you too.
It was, pretty drastic change, really. So all of the cropping paddocks are cropping paddocks, and they stay cropping paddocks. They're nice and clean anyway. We're doing a good enough job of that. So anything that was below average on yield, that went into pasture, and quite often those paddocks are really good at growing ryegrass, I found.
Yeah, right.
Like they'll get waterlogged, the barley will die, there'll be ryegrass there.
Yeah.
Just why don't we
good sheep paddocks
grow ryegrass there anyway? It wants to grow. Yeah. So pastures are pastures.
Yep.
Crops are crops, and then we've been planting every pasture every year.
So we've got a picture up there of what are you putting into your pastures? What are you sowing with?
So we did a couple of years of Balancer, tetraploid, and a diploid ryegrass.
Right.
The Balancer didn't. We've got really heavy grey clay, and it was hard to get a seed placement and just a good spot. We had it for a bit, but it didn't persist. But the ryegrass set a lot of seed, to the point where we're just sowing through it with barley now.
Right.
Yeah, and the density is amazing compared to where we were.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so you now that what's your date of lambing now?
1st of July.
And what sort of stocking rates are you sort of targeting?
We're at 10.5 this year. We could be a fair bit more after the season, but
25,
30. Yeah.
It is one aspect of this sowing cereals for grazing is that we are trying to find what the cap is, I suppose, on an average, whatever an average season sort of is, isn't it?
Yeah. Still work.
But you're targeting 10,
out.
so you targeted 10, or you just slipped up there as you just put more crop in? Or you stole pastures?
Yeah, we did. We've got hungry paddocks, and that was the nice thing about lambing in July is that we could just keep sowing pasture, like keep sowing crops. We weren't set.
You had better flexibility?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and you're looking at different varieties. So, do you do any? So you do some crop grazing as well?
Yeah. So we've been sowing Labo.
Your Labo, yeah.
Yep.
That's a winter wheat.
Yeah. So we can sow that. That went in March this year, and that's given us a bit of flexibility. Last year was a pretty terrible year, like livestock wise.
Yep.
Well, cropping as well a bit, but. A Labo went in March, we grazed it, and we ended up just leaving the sheep on it.
Yeah.
Like I still harvested a tonne to the hectare off it while the sheep was still in there. But I guess that's That's one of these nice flexible things. You can, if you're having a good year, you can whip the sheep off, have a good crop. If you're having a bad year, you can leave the sheep on it.
So you might target, say, if you next year, if you were saying, right, we've got not a bad break, I'm going to target 12 or 10.
Yep.
That's going to leave me reasonably exposed, but if it all goes to shit, I'll graze some of the Illabo.
Yep.
And if it goes badly, I'll just turn it into a pasture. If it goes okay, I'll just pull them back out and go around. So that's your sort of secondary false break sort of exit strategy.
Yeah. Awesome flexibility. Like, it just gives you options.
Yeah, cool. And so stocking at 10, so that's 5 DSC to 10 DSC, and you're seeing that. And so I guess one of the things that people are probably wondering, you've gone back to July lambing, but, what are you doing with your lambs? How's that affecting your... Are they dying in the springtime, or how are you managing your later lambs? What's going on there?
Well, we've got more pasture.
So that's and I suppose your pastures are pastures now. So when you normally used to be spray topping all your pastures in
now we're just going
October.
Go ryegrass. Yeah, it's just different. So we're holding on to the pastures till the end instead of turfing them. Yeah.
And what sort of are you selling them at a different time? Your lambs? You finding you have to sell them a lot later, or?
I'm still getting my head around. Fattening lambs and how to deal with all that.
As opposed to, it was just the way it was. They were fat when they went off the farm in spring in the early days.
Yeah. That'd be a fair comment.
But you're happy with their condition going into summer?
Yes. Yep. And then things change. There's options available to get rid of them without fattening them now and look after ewes and stuff. So you just deal with it as it is, I suppose. Yeah.
It's certainly a wonderful time for livestock, and we've said to a few people before, when you can sell, you're not getting discounted for lighter lambs. You're just getting paid on a kilo basis. So where before, if you had have tried that and you were getting $40 for your store lambs, it sort of took a lot of the fun out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome, Xavier. Thanks so much.
No worries.
Round of applause for Xavier.
Hold on, mate.
One last thing, Xavier. You sent me that map through. With the blue patches. Do you want to talk about that? What you're thinking, and how with what we're thinking about going forward with pastures?
So that's a barley paddock. That was sown down to Maximus at 65 kilos as a crop. And I was just flicking through. We were bulking up some Commodus, the new IMI barley, and I was a bit tight with the seed. Sowed it at 30 kilos, and mucking around on Google or whatever the satellite thing is. And the blue one is the Commodus sown at half the rate, and just a huge amount more biomass. So going forward, it's obviously picking the right barleys and stuff.
Because that's just to explain, the IMI tolerant barley is a huge thing for using cereals in pastures and grazing crops because of your ability to manipulate grasses out later in the season. So you can take out grass for those people who don't understand, it's very hard to take grass out of regular cereals. So with an IMI tolerant, it's very easy to do that. You can have that choice. So
we can have that and a medic and hit it with a Raptor and take out barley grass, brome, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, mate. We're going to have a little panel at the end, so we can ask questions then. Benny, come on down. Benny Zadow, come on down. You're a legend because you're just a legend, mate.
Thanks, Ed.
Because you got up here.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
See how we go.
Awesome. Now, Benny, you might like to have a look at the photo behind you. So, can you please tell me what's going on that picture of you over on the side there?
Benchmarking.
Day
one benchmarking with Ed. It's a tough gig, but Ed walked me through and we're doing some benchmarkings. I have been doing benchmarking for the last, might be my third year.
That's Benny trying to find balance his opening numbers to his closing numbers right there. Benny, where do you live? Where's your farm?
In between Kojonup and Broomhill.
Yep, and what's the size of it?
Managed for about 4,000 acres. Some of it, half of it a family farm and the other half lease country.
Yeah.
Yep.
And percentage of crop and pasture nowadays?
Nowadays, I'm up to 45% crop this year.
Yeah.
And obviously 65% pasture, whereas traditionally probably 20% crop.
Yeah.
So it's been a massive change in the last 4 years trying to get my head around. I'm traditionally, I'm opposite to Xavier actually. He's saying he's a crop man. I'm saying I'm a sheep man. We're going about it the other way around.
Yep.
He's trying to get his head around the sheep, and I'm trying to get my head around the crop. So
you 4 or 5 years ago, you're 20% crop, 80% pasture.
Yep.
And not to put words in your mouth, you're trying to improve you've been talking to a few people and you're trying to improve your output, your stocking rate. You sort of got your head around stocking rate and you're trying to improve it. And what sort of impact's that having on your farm? How's that going with your management?
The sheep-wise has gotten very easy.
But then
it was...
That's what we're talking about. 4 years ago, how was that? Managing the sheep numbers, trying to increase your stocking rate while you've only got 20% crop in your business because you're running a pretty high one.
Yeah, well, I was up around that 10 DSC and trying to run those sheep through summer into autumn, just not having those stubbles there was a massive challenge. It was huge, just feed. Paddocks were bare, just waiting for that hopefully, fingers crossed, for that break of the season early.
That Anzac Day break.
Which sort of just kept going later and later and later, and just that posed a lot of challenges. Yeah.
So a bit of challenge. You're still trying to get your head around increasing stocking rates. So what sort of changes did you start to make? Did you look at your time of lambing then, or was it confinement? Were you confining there as well?
4 years ago, I just started confinement feeding, just out of pure necessity because of the poorer starts.
Just ground cover.
Ground cover, poorer starts. Just want to get my sheep off the paddocks, stop them blowing away, get them close to home. I had probably half a dozen little pens set up close to home, which gradually over the last 4 years have extended a couple of pens every year.
Lambing?
Lambing, I was traditionally my dad was sort of May lambing, June, and then 4 years ago we moved it to July, and that just made a world of difference.
So 1st of July, for how long were you lambing for?
5 weeks, 6 weeks. Yep. So yeah, it was a long lambing, and it was just I found at lambing time was just you're always got to check your sheep, because you want to be a farmer and a shepherd. Go out, check them, try and do the right thing. But it was just such a big drag, like that six weeks lambing when you could be doing other things. Slowly brought it back to 4 weeks, and then even this year brought it back to 3 weeks. And
so you've just been going later every year?
Later every year. So went to 18th of July this year, lambing. Right. But my time of mulesing is still the same.
Right.
So just condensing everything down, buying a bit more time at the start.
Yeah. So were you feeding during lambing in those previous years? 4
years ago, yes. Yeah. So I was still in lambing in 1st of July, but there was, I think there was 1 year where we had a fairly late break, and all the sheep were just on the paddocks, just chewing it. So then I think I was feeding up until August.
Yeah.
That 1 year, I think that was like 2016. It was a nightmare, but it was a big lesson learned. It was just like, gee, you've got to do something about this. That's when the confinement lighting really kicked in, probably the following year. Doubled with that, and that really worked, and just carried on from there.
And so what sort of conception rates have you been getting? So what sort of conception rates were you getting at 90%? At 4 weeks?
4 weeks I was pulling out about 5% dries.
So you've got Doonies?
Doonies, yes.
Still Doonie or a bit of infused?
A bit of infusion going on now with a bit of, what have I got mixed in there? Merino Tech and a bit of
Merino.
Center Plus.
Bit of dual purpose.
Yeah, a bit of dual purpose. Still sticking with the dual purpose style.
Yep. And so you're getting 90%, and then you wanted to tighten things up again, and you went to 3 weeks. And so what was the strategy? How did you manage that going into that sort of scenario? Did you think, I'm going to keep a few extra, I'm thinking I'll get 80% conception or 85, I'll keep a few more ewes during joining?
Yes, yeah. Yep. I went into it with, at the start of this year, putting rams out, thinking I had surplus of ewes.
Yep.
So I thought, if I lose an extra 5-10% through dries by that one more week, well, so be it. I got the numbers to lose. But
You got the stocking rate sorted,
Yes.
regardless.
Yep. And by doing that, I can condense the lambing down, go later, sow cereals early, get them up and going.
So you've changed your pasture system much?
Yes, yeah, probably that's been the main thing. You harped on to me for I think 12 months before it sank into my brain. You said to me, just go out there, tickle a bit of oats into the ground, see what happens. And I think it was last year we did that. I sowed some oats pre-rain.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
We had a photo of pre and post.
Pre. It was just a couple of ships. It got late at night, so I'll give up. Went home. Rain must have had 7 or 8
He's a great
mils.
sheep farmer. That's what I like about sheep farmers. Too hard and going home.
Anyway, so I had a bit of rain that night, and then the following day I carried on seeding the whole paddock. There was that massive difference between the dry seeding and
Yeah, would have been
non-dry
like
seeding.
400 kilos
Yeah,
of
it was
difference
huge.
between them. It was amazing.
And that just opened opened a lot of doors and just gone, oh wow, this is massive. So then this year, first week April, just got out dry sown as much as I could. Funny enough, it rained a couple of days later, and it just everything shot out of the ground perfectly.
So that's giving you. So you're going to have more stubbles this summer. So you've managed to so you're actually getting a bit more crop into your business as well. So a bit more income.
Yes, yeah, that has been a massive trying to get my head around. I think it was always traditionally wake your 20% crop in, fill your silos up. You got that surplus not so much surplus, but you got your silos full to feed your sheep over the summer. But whereas now, filling the silos, but I've also got a heap of grain to sell, which I've never had before, and that's income wise, that's massive for me.
And now it's a case. So what are your challenges going forward?
Cropping for me.
Yeah.
I've never traditionally been a cropper, but just slowly trying to get my head around the rotations and from going from sheep mentality to probably cropping more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely cropping more with rotations and.
But you're running the same amount of sheep.
Same amount of sheep, if not more.
Yeah.
It is more sheep. Yeah.
And just I mentioned before about how you're leasing some land and you leased some ewes, and that was quite interesting observing your doonies next to the merino, the traditional merino type next to them.
Yeah, that was a massive observation. Both in feeding exact same ration. I think I was feeding the merinos even a little bit more, but the doonies they gobbled up everything that was there, but the merinos just seemed to leave the feed on the ground, just peck at it, not really being in a rush to eat it.
That's quite interesting because we're reading some documents from the East Coast on feeding sheep and confinement. It was like, well, they can only eat so much a day, so the headspace recommendation was quite small, a bit smaller than our 20 centimetres, Adrian, or 30, it was more like 5. And it's like, don't worry, if you feed them enough for 2 or 3 days, they can only eat so much, then they'll walk away and come back to it. And talking to Clayton South, another client, he said, well, I did that, mate, and they ate it all in about 30 seconds flat. But you're seeing the same thing. Your sheep eat it, but it's
just the merino that I had there was just traditional proper merino of old school merino. But a dooney is a dooney. Just not saying there's anything wrong with either one of them.
Yeah, it's just an observation.
A massive observation in that same space. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Awesome, Benny. I might just put this up quickly. This is a video I took at Benny's last year, so you can get a bit of an idea of what we're talking about.
Benny, how long have you been doing confinement for?
This would be the 3rd year.
And why'd you get into it?
Just probably out of pure necessity. The
You're a good-looking
later
man.
breaks that we've been having in the last couple of years, and just to try and defer pastures at that critical time.
So you're what percentage crop are you?
Probably about 20% crop.
So that makes it a bit more important because you just don't have the stubbles to drag it out a bit further as well, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Yeah. So your confinement area, tell us about the size of the pens and how complicated it is and how you do it?
Probably as least complicated as possible. These pens, these ones are probably about 500 square metres roughly, sort of 50 by 100, thereabouts, give or take. That's what I try and get them to. And just sort of been trying to utilise what was originally here, as in terms of where the water was and where the original owners had, or Dad also had smaller pens set up, and being close to the sheds and yards. And
You've got barley straw, and you trail feed them.
Trail feed them probably every second day with oats and 1 feed of lupins. So yeah, 3 to 4 times a week.
And you've learned a bit over the last few years of doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot.
What are some of the key things you've changed?
Keep drenching them, keeping the worms out of them.
Yeah.
In such a tight confined spot, keeping the worms out.
Calcium?
Calcium is a big one. Calcium, the salt licks and calcium licks and whatever licks you can give them. And just probably keeping on the right side of the nutrition side, of feeding them. Feeding them enough, not being on the wrong side of it.
A few changes this year. You pushed your lambing back a couple of weeks.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
And you've shortened your joining up to
28 days.
28 days from 5 weeks.
Yep.
So we've gone over the rest of the stuff, but yeah, that's awesome. So this is a bit of an insight to how Benny's confinement works as well. So thank you, Benny Zadow.
No, thanks, Ed. Cheers.
Sam Lehmann to the floor. Sam Lehmann to the floor. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
Sam Lehmann, 251 games with the Mount Barker Bulls. Let's hear from Sam Lehmann. It's all over the Southern News if you don't know. Well, why would you? Sam, welcome. So, where do you farm, mate?
We are just north of Cranbrook.
Yep. And how big's your farm?
Between owned and leased, about 2,500 hectares.
Yep. And roughly how much stock how many sheep have you got roughly?
Well, we're breeding ewes about 4,500 this year, and probably about a 70% sheep operation.
Yep.
60 to 70%.
So let's get into it. So 4 or 5 years ago, tell us about your system.
Yeah, so we were always keen on pastures and trying to get things going. So say 4 or 5 years ago, we were drilling in cereals into our pastures and trying to get that early growth. But we were also joining ewes for a 6-week period in January, early January, which meant we were lambing early June. And always found that we were able to establish these pastures, but we had to put the ewes out before they'd got away. So it just felt like we were missing a trick there.
You're hitting a wall.
Yeah, we could see the potential in what we were doing, but when our ewes had to come out of deferment, out of those confinement areas, the feed hadn't got away by that stage.
And you're trying to push it. You're trying to increase your income.
Yep.
Land's leasing, so you're trying to increase your profit per hectare is important. So I guess trying to increase that stocking rate you're hitting a wall with that as well.
Definitely, yeah. So we were trying to push we were still around 10 DSC then, and finding that it was hard work on the ewes because we hadn't built that feed wedge in front of them, but still trying to run a fairly heavy stocking rate.
So you were doing some sort of deferment at that stage, or had you got to that point?
It was sort of halfway there almost. Like once we considered the paddocks were getting bare, we'd sort of move them into smaller paddocks, but it wasn't sort of halfway into confinement. We were getting them off sort of half the farm, in a sense, but not really, just not quite there in terms of being able to lock them up.
And so what happened next? What was the next step?
Probably year on year, each year, we just changed things a little bit. So we moved from that 6-week mating, we come into 5, so that we took a week off the start of lambing.
Yep.
And then we moved to a
mid-June lambing, and we thought we're still not quite there. And obviously, discussions with Ed along the way about the way where we're heading to now being 4 weeks mating, and we've moved that to a 10th of July lambing. So.
And how's that gone with your stocking rate now?
So now on those pastures that we're sowing, we're aiming at a 14 to 15 DSE, and feel like we're reasonably comfortable with that. And one of the things with that is if we have a couple of paddocks, like swing paddocks, that if it is starting to get tight, or we've got options to turn a cropping paddock into a pasture if need be.
And there's top corner picture, your confinement's changed as well?
Yeah, so this is sort of, that top one is, or feedlotting really. So initially we were trying to manage the ration through lick feeders, but found it really hard to control that ration. You'd have some animals that were putting on weight and some that were the shy feeders that were falling away really quickly. So we found that for us, the lick feeder system is for fattening and not so much for...
And they're open?
Yes, when we're using them to put weight on.
And so how's your confinement feeding system going? How's that working for you?
Yeah, it's always a work in progress. I think each year we kind of bring the paddocks in smaller and smaller, probably create more of those smaller holding areas and try and make it convenient for water points and management, if we can get them near closer to home, closer to the haystacks and the straw.
What sort of ration do you feed, roughly? What type of ration?
Yeah, so we have been barley and straw the last few years, and we've had these conversations about reaching that tipping point of late in confinement, feeding a ration of barley, getting up around 500 grams a day becomes a little bit of a drama if you're only feeding once or 2 or 3 times a week. So yeah, there's room for improvement there.
Yeah, and 2 minutes, good. And I guess the other thing is what you're doing with your pastures and the stocking rates you're running. It's pretty interesting driving around the district when you're this last year particularly.
Not so much this year.
Not so much this year. We'll give a snapshot of what's going on this year. Yeah. But about you looking at your pastures and going, well, what's, other people who are running lower stocking rates than you and the amount of feed they've got. Yeah,
you feel like there's a lot of potential there. Gives you a lot of confidence when you can build that feed wedge, and you sort of know that even on a tighter start to a year, if you're able to get things going early, gives you that confidence to lamb at a heavier rate.
Yeah, and do you? I think you started rotating grazing out of confinement this year as well.
Yeah, so
that's
been another bonus for us, is just moving big mobs around and trying to still spell those lambing paddocks for as long as we can, and then in that last week or two prior to lambing, split them off into their smaller mobs, and just feel I'm sure we're growing more feed because of it. We're giving the pastures a longer period of time to grow.
Cool. Well, Sam's in a bit of aquaculture this year. He's started to grow some perch and things. So that's
hybrid canola.
But let's look at some good news.
Dams full.
Yeah, dams are full. Hallelujah. Dams are full. Rightio. This is some data that we collected and Phil actually put together. But I just want to take you through these, quickly put this first data because it's bloody exciting. So 2015, right? I'm going to take, so we've got year, growing season roundful, start of lambing, length of joining, use per hectare, conception marking. 2015, 265, long joining, use per hectare 6, and I won't worry about conception, I'll just get to marking. So that's marking percentage as a percentage of use joined. Use per hectare 6, 93% marking. 17, 299, June 15, length of joining 6 weeks, 7 use per hectare, 98% marking. 2019, 6.5 use to the hectare, 227, lower rainfall. 99% marking. 2020, length of joining 4 weeks, 7.8 ewes to the hectare, 103% marking. Now, ewes per hectare and marking percentage. Let's look at some figures. 2015, ewes per hectare, 5.6. Per 100 mils of rainfall, lambs per 100 mils of rainfall per hectare, 2.1. 6.9, 2.3. 6.4, 2.8. 2020, 8 and 3.5. That is a variation between 2015 and 2020. This is of 2.5 lambs per hectare, or 1.4 lambs per 100 mils of rainfall. That is a 44% increase of lambing, or a 64% of lambing per 100 mils of rainfall. So when you go to the pub and you can tell them, oh yeah, I've increased my lambing by 64%. I said, geez, you must have been crap to start with. That's the power of stocking rate right there, people, right? It doesn't get much more simple than that. That's what they say, a lovely set of figures. Congratulations. Sam Lehmann, everyone. All right, do you want to just gather around and we'll get some questions happening?
You guys with the...
Direct it to one? Is there one person?
Oh, not the panel. Right. Ben.
Yes.
With the weaning, when you wean your... Actually, Sam. When you finish lambing,
Yep.
do you go back to rotational grazing and do you mob up?
Yes. Yeah.
And what happens?
So I've found that I'm limited to, until we mules, I can't have too big a mobs because I can't bring 2,000 ewes in and their lambs on a day for mulesing. So we kind of work that as soon as we can start moving them around again, we'll put them into an appropriate mob size. Especially on a year like this where we've got paddocks like that one that are just underwater, and I just desperately want to move them onto some higher ground, but I haven't been able to during lambing. So I think rotationally grazing will be there's a bit of time to do it, but it's worth it, for the animals.
I'll ask a question before Eric, because he doesn't get to.
How big a mob size?
Damn.
So before mulesing, you mean?
Post.
Post. Well, we might have 2 or 3. So, say if we've got 50 hectare paddocks, we'll have a mob of 2,000 and their lambs going through those 50 hectare paddocks, and we might have mobs of 1,000 for smaller areas, something like that. So it's not all the same.
Good job, fellas. Well done. Xavier, probably to you most, and then the other guys also. The role of sub-clovers in your permanent pastures now, having been a clover guru like you were, have they just disappeared out of the system altogether? Do you see a place for them in your system anymore?
I guess you've got to look at what we were getting out of them. So we were getting a nice, clean cereal crop, and we were getting some nitrogen. At the moment, I'm managing to keep the crops clean just through management, I guess. And then if you work out how much it costs to buy the nitrogen versus give up that paddock for a year for a low stocking rate, it's a no-brainer. So as much as I dearly loved the clover system because it was simple and there's a lot of good points about it, at the moment, they're not there. So one of the things Ed was asking me about was what gave us the confidence to change. And I just couldn't, it was clouding my judgment looking at it as one system. So if I treated it like a cropping system, you'd never plant a crop and try and harvest it before it's ready. That's how I looked at it. So I'm like, oh, what are we doing? So I've got to grow the sheep are the harvesters, and and the pasture is the crop. I've just got to grow as much crop as I can and then harvest it efficiently. And I can't do that with the system that I've got. And so that's what led to the change, I guess. We just split it, like pull it down, grow a heap of tucker, and then harvest it efficiently with sheep.
Ed, just a topic that probably hasn't been a bit discussed, and it's more of a comment than a question about fetal ageing at preg scanning and what a big advantage that can be in confinement feeding, where so on a 30-day journey, you'll split into 2 3-week groups, and it's a huge advantage in a year like 2020 when you can let 2/3 of the ewes out and hold the last third in there for another couple of weeks until time of lambing. And just wondering whether anyone's looked at that and got any comment.
Xavier does it, I believe, or tried it this
year. Yeah, we do it. So we were a 4-week mating, split down the middle, early and lates. There's definitely advantage to... Well, we're getting... coming from like a 7 or 8 week mating to start with, going down to 4 and then splitting them in half is just amazing. Because pastures run out and you can't shift them when they're lambing. So it does complicate the system a little bit.
You are saying making it harder for you in a way, aren't you? I mean, the other day when we were talking, there's a complexity that comes with it as long as the benefit outweighs the complexity.
Yeah.
And how much labour you've got.
Every time you take on something new, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
So, but yes, to answer your question, we had late ewes running around on barley crops when the earlies had started lambing.
Benny, what gave you the confidence? I mean, I'd just like to finish on... I'm going to have to say 2 things. What gave you the confidence to make change? I mean, I think, Sam, you've talked about yours.
Confidence. Just to...
Was it the amount of feed that you were having, or was it that you were happy with the system, or...?
I was happy with... backtrack. No, I wasn't happy with the system. I was looking to make a change to obviously push my stocking rate, and the confidence came from you, I suppose. Go on, do it. Go on, get on with it. Sow some pastures, put your lambing back, shorten everything up. But yeah, that's where it came from, I suppose. Probably.
Well, that wasn't a Dorothy Dixit, but I just want to say, you're asking before lunch we were talking about, but how are people going to do it and how are people going to do these things? My attitude has completely changed from when I started consulting with the halls in 2005 and 2006. It was either, if you're not utilising what you got, don't start growing anymore, for God's sakes, because you're not, use what you've got before you start growing it. And definitely over this whole last 4 weeks. And it's really interesting because we've gone down the lifetime ewe path and we've been thinking about the sheep, but in the meantime, our pastures have just been getting worse and worse. So we sort of started thinking more about our pastures. And so if you want to make change, let's create a nice environment for you to make change. Okay, you might do a little bit of money in the first year, but you're going to pick it up in wool cut. I mean, so I guess our commodity prices have been there to give us extra lamb growth and all those things. But a good environment, and then it's definitely been this year, has been, okay, fellas, you've got the feed, it's time to make money. I did put the wood on you this year to do it, but I think
it's time to get off the scale.
No, it's not. This is bloody important because unless you give people a nice environment to do it in, or a good environment, it's not going to happen. And if they've got excess feed, then the chances of them changing their system is so much greater. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. You 3 stay there for 1 second.